Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Let me tell you something that you already know. Today is a rotten, awful day to be wearing that ugly shade of orange they wear up there in the eastern part of Tennessee, and it is a great day to be a Georgia Bulldog. And it has been that way now for 8 straight years of Georgia beating Tennessee. If you were lucky enough to be Between the Hedges on Saturday night, you will remember it, I think, forever. What a remarkable, remarkable evening it was. And what a statement by Georgia to let you know that, hey, listen, this team's not dead yet. This team is still fighting and clawing. This team has been through a schedule the likes of which nobody in the country has been asked to play thus far this year. But they are still alive, and they are still a very dangerous, very tough out as you start thinking about the college football playoff with 2 regular season weeks still yet to go, and all kinds of confusion about, what the actual playoff rankings will look like. We'll do most of that tomorrow. What the chase for the SEC championship is like, we'll get to that eventually, I guess. But the topic at hand for today, a big win for Georgia against Tennessee, greatly aided by an incredible atmosphere in Sanford Stadium. It was kind of conjured up by a lot of new bells and whistles that we told you were probably coming. But the response from the fans, Dog Nation unifying here to make this what it was. It's Jon Stinchcomb on today's show. We'll talk about all of what Georgia did on the field to make this happen. We'll talk about Tennessee's whining. If you're lucky enough to be watching us on video, we're going to give you a lot of the look back on the best moments from the atmosphere on Saturday night. And we are going to sink our teeth into a really teeth. I sound like a Tennessee fan. We're going to sink our teeth into just a wonderful, wonderful night between the hedges. So what do you say we get ready to get it all started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
The last 2 Mondays in the show, I've started off by saying, boy, I don't know how this season's going to end for Georgia, but this run of competing and contending and having a shot at a championship, I just want it to last as long as it possibly can. I said that after the win against Florida. I said that after the loss against Ole Miss, that, hey, maybe this ends shy of a national championship, but as long as this run can go, as deep into the season as it is possible for it to be, man, I want to savor every moment of it and then just enjoy it as long as it lasts. And on this Monday, I come in here wanting to say the same thing again. After a great night for Georgia in Sanford Stadium, Dog fans were awesome. We're going to celebrate all of you for that on today's show. We're going to celebrate the team for what it did on Saturday with the full knowledge of, hey, maybe it's still not quite a national championship season. Maybe when this season comes to an end, this still isn't the best team in the country, but they do live to fight on for another week, and they do remain a part of the conversation, and they do have a strong response to, like, the college football playoff selection committee, which we'll mostly get into tomorrow, or national media types who are just so eager to eventually write Georgia off. What we found out on Saturday is that Georgia cannot be written off yet, and those that want to write Georgia off may not ever get the luxury of doing that. And listen, we know what the vibe was after Ole Miss. And I think, you have to be honest. You have to admit that Georgia did play badly. And, yeah, the place you played and the opponent you played impacts some of that. But it was a bad performance. But what we said was, and you'll remember this. In fact, many of you have already brought this up to me, of, hey, you can be disappointed with how your team played against Ole Miss, but don't make any kind of like fatalistic proclamation just yet. Don't say anything yet that you can't come back from. Don't declare it over or condemn a coach or a player on this team. Just give yourself some wiggle room for the possibility that you might feel better after the next Saturday night, the one we just saw against Tennessee. So here we are on this Monday after having said that a week ago. My question to all of you is, don't you feel a little bit better now? Don't you feel a little different now? Perhaps not every single question you have about this team is fully answered yet, and that is okay. But after seeing this team against a Clemson team ranked in the top 25 win 34-3, A hard-fought game in Alabama, but then a win at Texas. A tough game against Ole Miss, but then a bounce-back win against a top 10 ranked Tennessee. Don't you see Georgia right now perhaps proving more than any team in America because of the kind of schedule they're doing all of this again? And 3-2 in the slate of 5 games that I just described is actually a pretty impressive resume compared to so-and-so in whatever part of the country you want to point out who's maybe not playing anybody right now, that Georgia's just doing a lot more than that. And maybe as it goes through all of this, is sort of learning more about itself in the process of doing these kinds of things. It's one of the things that Kirby Smart talked about after the game on Saturday, how proud he was of his guys for the fact that facing this adversity and facing these tough challenges, this team is still willing to stick together and kind of rise to the moment with like one more chance to sort of prove what it really is. This is what Kirby Smart said about that after the game.
Our kids show resiliency. I'm proud of them. Look, it was a week ago, a couple hours that we were dead and gone. You know, people had written us off. It's hard to play in this league week in and week out on the road. We've accumulated a tremendous amount of injuries from the schedule we've had, and it's not going to really get any easier. It's a physical game, but when you play the gauntlet of what we played, it's taking its toll. We had a lot of guys sitting on the sideline tonight that couldn't play, but we also had a lot of guys that stepped up. And I think the way we practice has helped us grow some players who stepped up tonight and played big for us.
I'm going to be honest with you. The impression that I get is that this season has not been all that much fun for Georgia. Kirby talks about the physical toll the games have taken. Georgia does have a lot of injuries, but I think we can sort of also recognize kind of an emotional toll, maybe a psychological toll of when you are asked to do what on a week-to-week basis Georgia's been asked to do, and we're not going to apologize for saying this, in a way that almost no other team in the country is doing. Even a team like Texas, who you'd think is of a similar stature, they play in the same league, Texas has played one ranked opponent the entire year. You know, they're going to Arkansas on Saturday and, barely getting by against an Arkansas team that's no great shakes. You would think that Texas and Georgia would be facing similar, to use Kirby Smart's word, gauntlets right now. They're just not. That Texas has been either through sheer coincidence or perhaps something else been given a cakewalk of a schedule that Georgia has not been given, and Georgia's feeling the effects of that. And so that's one of the reasons why we're going to get more into the fan part of this later on about the great crowd and all that kind of stuff. It's one of the reasons why nights like Saturday are important. Like, it can't all just be like grit your teeth and grind. Like, there's got to be a moment when it's fun. There's got to be a moment when you're celebrating. And it can't just be like the last moment of the season when you win a national championship. Like, no one will sign up for that forever. There's got to be some happiness and some celebrating along the way. And that's what Georgia earned the right to do with the way that it played against, Tennessee. And the fact that they did do this after bouncing back from a loss against Ole Miss and a game in which Georgia probably played as bad as we've certainly seen them play in the Smart era in recent years, I think that makes it all the more impressive. And Kirby did talk about that too, the feeling of being able to do this after kind of the lowest low after the game against Ole Miss. Kind of Kirby talked about what that shows about his team, not just as players, but as men, that they were able to do all of that. Here's Kirby again.
How you handle losses says a lot about you, and these kids are going to grow up to be contributors to society, and how they respond to tough situations, man. They're so much more prepared for bad things to happen in their life because of what they do in this organization and what they go through and the criticism they take. They'll never be as criticized as they are by the outside world in this sport. And I'm proud of the way they stuck together and kind of bonded and came out and played well.
I mean, it is true that the intensity around college football, but especially SEC football, is just more intense than almost anything else. In a lot of ways, it's just even more intense in the NFL where, yeah, you're playing for at least theoretically a bigger paycheck, and the games are on Sunday, and you get all kinds of television audience and things like that. But I can promise you, you'd be hard-pressed to find an NFL fan base that lives and dies with the good and the bad and everything else in between like the Georgia fan base does, DawgNation does when it comes to this particular team. We talked the other day about the old Barry Switzer line about, a program becomes a monster, and you got to keep feeding the monster. And honestly, I think at times this season, to be honest with you, I think the idea of feeding this beast, feeding this monster, I think it gets a little tiring. I think it gets a little exhausting. I think the coaches are worn out. I think the players are worn out. I just think it is a burden sometimes to live with the toughness of all of this. Now, the flip side is you're the biggest hero in the world when you win, so it's like the highest of highs and lowest of lows. But still, it is a grueling process. And the fact that Georgia has come through this SEC slate, now 6-2, slate of like ranked opponents, in many cases like top 15, top 10 ranked opponents, and they're 3-2 in those games, in a combination of opponents the likes of which nobody in America is playing right now. I think it says something about UGA, although on Saturday Kirby wanted to stop just a little bit short of saying what he thought it meant. He sort of leaves that up to everybody else, but he certainly no doubt once again wants to compliment the way in which Georgia has not at any point in time quit during any of this, perhaps even when it had reason to. This is what Kirby Smart said on the conclusion of the SEC schedule for Georgia. Georgia now in the clubhouse, at least when it comes to conference play, at 6-2.
I'll let y'all judge. I mean, everybody thinks we should win every game. I'm very proud of our team. If you told me that this group would be this resilient, I would probably say I don't doubt it, because they're great kids and they played the toughest schedule in our league, and we still got 2 games left of tough teams. Georgia Tech's got a great team, and UMass has played 3 or 4 SEC teams already.
Yeah, for what it's worth, and this is not for today, but UMass played really close against Liberty on Saturday. Pretty impressive showing. They didn't win the game, but boy, they played a lot closer than experts would have predicted in a game like that. So we'll get into the UMass part of this later on. Obviously, the Tech game on Black Friday is going to be a really big deal. But ultimately, Kirby's right. You look at the schedule, just any SEC schedule, but obviously in a year like this, not all SEC schedules are created equally. The specific SEC schedule that Georgia's been asked to play, the fact that a team like Clemson, which might win the ACC, was also a neutral site to begin the season. What Georgia has done to this point in time, I do believe is pretty impressive. And frankly, I think it's more impressive than what these other championship teams, even the ones, at least the championship contending teams, even the ones that have better records, are being asked to do. I think that Georgia has a right to say, hey, look at what we're doing. It's not perfect. We got some blemishes. We've taken some dings, but we are proving more in our good moments than any team in America is, because of the kind of schedule that this season we're being asked to play. Now, let's talk about this here for a moment. Why did Georgia win? What was, other than the incredible atmosphere, kind of overwhelming Tennessee, as has happened before, and why is it that Georgia won this game? I think there's so much you can shout out. As I mentioned on the X platform Saturday night, I thought that Mike Bobo really deserved to take a bow after this game. I thought he, especially with how you got the tight ends involved, a couple of touchdowns for Oscar Dell, probably one of the better nights for Ben Urasic, Lawson Lucky. You had to play more tight ends because of the situation at wide receiver, but the creative way in which those guys were getting involved, I mean, it looked like a very good night for Mike Bobo. Some very, very shrewd play calls created opportunities here. I thought Carson Beck looked really, really comfortable and even took on the extra responsibility of running more than we've seen him do in the past, including like lowering his shoulder at one point in time, rushing touchdown. That was also a very reaffirming game for him, where he had a chance to say, hey, you've seen me on the road. You've seen me in tough situations. You have perhaps at times this year not seen me at my best, but this is what I can be. And with the potential for a lot more games still yet to go in this season, perhaps also an exciting thought of what more could be on the way for him. That was a very good night, I thought, for Carson Beck. That was a really good night for the Georgia defense, getting after Nico Iamaleava and getting some sacks and, holding Tennessee once again to 17 points. This is a situation where Josh Heupel was brought to Tennessee as an offensive mastermind, and against a lot of teams, Tennessee has scored a lot of points. But that's never really happened against Georgia. Smile Monin comes back, and boy, what a big game he had. C.J. Allen playing really well. Georgia did give up some rushing yards, but listen, Tennessee has an offense that's designed to get some of that easy stuff, up the middle. Sometimes they're going to get it. This is not a 2021 Georgia defense that just doesn't give up anything to anybody, but it's make sure you don't give up the wrong thing at the wrong time, the big play that becomes the big touchdown. And Georgia really did that on Saturday. So I'll give credit to the defense. I'll give credit to the tight ends. I'll give credit to Mike Bobo. I'll give credit to Carson Beck. But let me tell you, to bang the fist on the table, this game belonged to the Georgia offensive line. This was the Georgia offensive line's game. And I'm sorry, Georgia just proved again, they're just tougher than Tennessee. And Tennessee's a good football team, and there are plenty of teams that Tennessee might be able to beat. And the same way we would say, or Kirby would say, going to Oxford is hard. Well, Tennessee can say coming to Athens is hard. A lot of mitigating factors here, perhaps, but this was a game that belonged to the Georgia offensive line. I tell you what, I about came out of my shoes on Saturday night. We were doing the dog walk before the game. When Dylan Fairchild came walking in, Dylan's always got this super professional look to him, just like the toughest looking dude in the world. And he walks in carrying that old school lunch pail. I'm talking about this was like you didn't buy this at the hardware store the day before the game. So this came from somebody's grandfather or something. This was that old school lunch pail. That was the mentality that this team wanted to play this game with. And you had Ernest Green, who's banged up, and Ernest, to his credit, has been fighting through injury a lot this season, apparently. We've learned that as of late. This team went out. They protected Carson Beck. He dropped back to pass a million times. Georgia ran 70-whatever plays. No sacks. Very little in the way of pass pressure. Only a couple tackles for loss, I believe, in the game. This game, more so, with all due respect to the defense, who had some moments, Carson, who had a lot of moments, the Georgia tight ends, which obviously provided a lot of the scoring, and Mike Bobo, who probably deserves some flowers. With all due respect to all of that, everything hummed on Saturday because of what the Georgia offensive line did. This was their night. This was their time to get that game ball. They brought the lunch pail mentality. And after the game, Kirby Smart talked about the role that, say, Tate Ratledge played in all this as he fights back from injury and plays an opponent that matters to him, and the way in which that kind of became a catalyst for everything else this Georgia offensive line did in the face of some perhaps justifiable criticism. This is Kirby after the game on that.
Didn't know how Tate would hold up, and that game meant a lot to Tate. Tate grew up in a Tennessee family and a dad that was a Tennessee fan, and that game was a lot of pride to him. And I thought his energy and toughness really showed. And just a week ago, he dinged it and couldn't go, and he went out there tonight and really played physical, played tough. But those guys, they took a lot of criticism from people, and really unwarranted in my opinion, because it's funny when you talk to people that actually know football, they know how hard it is to play in that environment. And then people just, say, oh, sacks, oh, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. When you get behind in a game, it makes it hard. Tonight, they played aggressively and played well.
I mean, listen, whether the criticism the offensive line took after last week was warranted or not, it's probably a different conversation for a different day, and how much of that is sort of explained away by playing a good team on the road. Other people other than me will probably debate and discuss that. But either way, after what was not, matter-of-factly, a good game against Ole Miss, it was an awesome game against Tennessee. And listen, it is no secret that the best Georgia teams, 2021, 2022, got great offensive line play. And the best games that Georgia can still play the rest of this season, a chance for that offensive line to do more of what they did on Saturday somehow, some way, finding 5 guys who are healthy enough to play, coming together as a unit, giving Carson time to throw, creating some opportunities for the running game. It was awesome to see the Georgia offensive line have its best game, I believe, of its season so far, in a moment in which Georgia really, really needed that bounce back. The Georgia offensive line literally brought its lunch pail and helped get that done. So in all the things to celebrate, the Georgia offensive line may be the thing to celebrate most of all. But this is the sort of the theme for today, looking back on an incredible night in Sanford Stadium and celebrating the way the team played, but also celebrating the atmosphere that was created around it. Everybody coming together, unified as one. DawgNation really showed out on Saturday night. We've got a lot more to say about all that today. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. If you're watching us on video, we're glad you're here. If you see us later on video, we are obviously appreciative of that, too. That's what most of you do. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960, the Rep podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just so thankful that you're part of our program, and really, really thankful to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make it possible. You know, Georgia felt very comfortable at home on Saturday night, and you want to feel comfortable at home too. That means energy-efficient windows and doors give you a chance to do that, especially if we get a little cooler. Holiday time of the year means cold weather, and when you see that wind whipping on the outside or you see that cold weather, obvious signs of that, it's always nice to feel toasty and warm on the inside of your house. And, you know, if you live in one of these like older houses, or perhaps your windows haven't been replaced in a long time, you know when you're like walking in the hallway, especially like the upstairs part of the house, you sort of feel that draft. You sort of feel cold air getting in somewhere. It's not supposed to be getting in. It means your windows aren't sealed properly. It means they're probably just old, need to be replaced. And if you haven't like investigated like the new technology around the window, the likes of which what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about, I think it's a really fun thing to sort of realize just how many great options exist there now, and some fun things that you didn't even know were possible when it comes to your entry door, your windows, things like that. Just really an amazing product that Pella, has for you. And so I think it's time for you to have, if you want to take the best possible care of what's probably your largest investment, that your own home, then talk to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Have one of those Pella experts come out to your house, walk you through your installation options, the product line, and all the reasons why Pella is the right choice for you. And find out about great savings, too, between now and November 30th. $250 off qualifying windows and $500 off per qualifying door, or you can get no payments, no interest if you pay it in full within 12 months. That's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. It's not a pressure thing. They're not trying to push you towards something. They simply want to inform you on really why Pella Window and Door of Georgia is always going beyond. So I want you to give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. You can also find them online at PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Find out, as I said a moment ago, why Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. Now, we're going to go beyond ourselves here in a moment, beyond just my opinions, and get that of the great former Georgia All-American Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. Also, before we're done today, we're going to have a really good look back, especially for those of you on video, at some of those really cool scenes from Sanford Stadium on Saturday, as put together by our friend Cody Chavins. In fact, Cody's going to join us for a minute or two to sort of talk about some of this before we're done. Just an awesome, awesome night in Sanford Stadium. And frankly, everybody there gets credit for that. And in fact, we'll talk about that right now as we go around the Doghouse Sport today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And what we said last week a lot is this is one of the things that I think that Kirby does that's a really generous act for fans. The fact that Kirby historically has invited fans to be a part of this, that this isn't just a they-them thing, the team playing down there on the field. It's also sort of a we-us thing, that Kirby says, hey, we need you. And you think about the Arkansas game in 2021, Kirby saying the fans got credit for 10 points that day, or the Tennessee game in 2022. Now, leading into this, when Kirby really did not ask a lot directly for fans to do their thing, and hey, he wasn't imploring the same way he perhaps would have in the past, and I think a lot of that was just due to the fact, as we said before, it's been a tough season for Georgia, a long season, a rigorous, grinding season. Georgia was coming off a loss. Maybe Kirby just wasn't in the mood to ask for the fan stuff the way that he sometimes would be. So what we said on our show was all the more reason that fans need to give that without asking. Give this team the boost that they deserve. And that's exactly what Georgia fans did. I mean, if you were there or if you're watching on TV, you saw all of this. That is exactly what Georgia fans did in such a big way. And the stadium operations people, because there have been a lot said about, drone shows in Austin, fireworks in Oxford, just the intensity of every venue that Georgia had to go play. Hey, let's make sure, whether it's the fans wearing black or the fireworks or anything else, let's make sure we're doing everything we can do to make our environment as intense as it can possibly be, especially since the powers that be, for a rare moment, gave Georgia a chance to host one of these big SEC games at 9. Take full advantage of that. And, man, if you were there, you know how true it was. And Kirby, as he always does, gave credit to the fans and everybody else who made the night as memorable as it turned out to be. This was Kirby after the game.
The energy was electric. It helped us. It inspired our kids and players. I thought it affected them. And once again, a team has to go on the road and play in that kind of night environment. It's really hard. It's really tough to play in that, and I thought it impacted them. I'd also like to give credit to Emily Dietz and her staff. They did a tremendous job with the game management in terms of the energy, keeping people engaged. I guess there were some fireworks. I don't know. Somebody told me there was, but that wasn't what I was worried about.
I mean, of all like the coach speaky things that Kirby Smart has ever said, perhaps my favorite thing of all is his statement that he did not know that there were fireworks during the game. Like, of all the things that Kirby Smart has said from a coach speak standpoint that are not quite so sure I believe that. The fact that Kirby says, yeah, I guess there were fireworks. Somebody told me about that. I mean, the fireworks were obviously unmissable, which is exactly what it should be. It should be that kind of show. And it should be using anything you can to make it, as the phrase was last week, hell on the opposition. Make it hell on Tennessee. And that is exactly what it all was on Saturday. And I joked about this on our postgame show. Honestly, when you come into a situation like that, whether you're on the receiving end of it like we were 2 weeks ago, or whether we, had the chance to provide to Tennessee on Saturday, it's amazing that a road team ever wins. It really is. It's amazing that a road team ever wins. And frankly, the fact that Georgia has won so many games on the road as it has, because we've seen Georgia go to Auburn and all these places where these fans are always, they're all over you from the word go. The fact that Georgia has emerged as frequently as it has is actually pretty commendable over the years. But this was a night on Saturday where the fans themselves get to put their fingerprints on the win. And Kirby invited you to, saying, hey, I thought you guys impacted it. You were part of it. And what a cool thing to think that team, coaches, players, games operation staff, that everyone unified around this night and helped get Georgia the big win that it desperately needed, and served as a reminder of what Georgia still can be in the remainder of this 2024 season for as long as it continues to last. That's awesome, man. What a night it was. What a great celebration. And I know whether you're watching on TV or actually lucky enough to be there in the stadium, I know how happy you all were to be a part of that. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And, boy, I tell you what, we had a great time this past Thursday. Talk about that national championship trophy. Dr. Pepper brought that with us to, our friends at Beaver Toyota of Cumming, and we had the championship trophy on hand. People got a chance to see that. We enjoyed all of that. And it is just a great, great reminder that Georgia can still be a part of this national championship conversation. Can I guarantee they're going to win it? I cannot. Can I guarantee they're going to have their say and that perhaps this championship pursuit for someone still goes through the University of Georgia? I think there's a very good chance that is the case. And also, how cool was it for me to see, our good friend Jonathan and some of our folks from Dr. Pepper. They had plenty of product on hand, so I was drinking plenty of that after the show there on Thursday, and a huge part of my game day on Saturday, too. We love our folks from Dr. Pepper, and we want you to enjoy, too. So I got a couple of big games here coming up, so get ready to enjoy some great tasting, the rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper for all of that, whether it be the strawberries and cream or, as I kind of like, the Diet Dr. Pepper, the Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar. I was sitting on the back porch yesterday enjoying a little Dr. Pepper, as is my tradition sometimes on a Sunday. You kind of enjoy some nice weather, enjoy a little football, and just enjoy the great taste of Dr. Pepper. So you enjoy that, too. We are always so proud of the fact that our friends at Dr. Pepper pour Around the Doghouse for us each and every Monday right here on DawgNation Daily. Really good stuff. All right, so that's the story. A lot to break down from a big win for Georgia against Tennessee, and a great voice to help us do all of that is the legendary former All-American. It's Jon Stinchcomb joining us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jon Stinchcomb. Always appreciate his time on our show. And John, every now and then there's just a few of these days that are just kind of like this, where you have a chance to just see everybody come together, the spirit of unity, when the fans are all moving in the same direction, when the team is feeding off that, when the entertainment aspects of the stadium environment are at the kind of the highest possible level, where you just sort of really feel like it's almost like, to use a word we don't typically use around football, it's just sort of a transcendent moment, right? It's just sort of one of those moments where you're like having more than just sort of a normal human experience, where you just sort of feel like, man, there's a connection happening here that's just a little bit deeper than the regular thing. And Saturday was just sort of one of those days where I just thought, you had some reason to believe that Georgia could put it together in the home crowd, and the crowd would provide that extra boost. And it just worked out that way. What a night it was for Georgia on Saturday. And how much credit do you think these fans get for the role they played in all of that?
Oh, they absolutely get credit. And there was a challenge that was extended to the Dog Nation following the Mississippi State game of we need Sanford Stadium to be a really hard environment for any traveling team to come and play in. And Saturday night, it was a factor. The energy in that stadium was palpable. You could see the effects on the field, the number of penalties, the miscues from Tennessee. A lot of that can be and should be attributed to the fan impact on the game. And it was such a great environment to be a part of for the players and fans alike. That was a really, really big, important game for Georgia. And to be able to come out on top and provide the environment with the fireworks and the lights and the blackout and just the engagement throughout the game and the end product being a W, real highlight. I think one of those games that we'll mention and circle back to for years to come.
And listen, I had a chance to be in the stands, and at least for a portion of the game on Saturday, I wanted to kind of soak up some of the environment. I had a chance to sort of feel some of that. And, what I'll tell you is that the thing we had kind of asked from fans going into the week was, hey, you're mad about this, or you're disappointed about that, or you're critical of this. Just hold off on those feelings for a while. See if you still feel that way after the Tennessee game. And if you don't, then give yourself some room to sort of change your mind. And I thought on Saturday, not because of me necessarily, but I thought on Saturday, the fans did a pretty good job of that where, listen, the team itself has been through the grind, and they obviously feel that, but it's a long season sometimes for the fans too. And, many of them invest a lot of money into Georgia football. And when things don't go the way they think they should go, there's a little bit of frustration around that. It's easy for that sort of frustration sort of bubble up as maybe not the best atmosphere for a game like Mississippi State, or maybe some real anxiousness during a game like Tennessee if things were to perhaps not go well. But I thought on Saturday the fans did a really good job of putting all that aside. And as we said last week, to allow some grace for a bad game against Ole Miss or a couple of losses in a season when we're not really used to seeing Georgia lose at all during the regular season. And just to give this team a chance to have a great moment at home. They had not been at home in forever. Give them a chance to sort of be fueled by a big-time crowd, show up in support and see what the response is. And I thought the fans did a really good job of that, putting aside their own feelings, whatever has happened so far during the season, giving this team now a chance to sort of have a fresh turn of the page with 3 home games to conclude the regular season, what we believe a strong start at the college football playoff after that. I thought the fans did a pretty good job of sort of pushing back whatever frustrations they themselves might have been experiencing and give this a chance to be sort of a fresh new look on the remainder of the year.
Well, I think that's what the end result was, but there was a couple moments with a drop ball here, a possible fumble there early in the game when Georgia was down, where you started to see some of those fruits of what's been going on this entire season start to bubble up. And I think really when Georgia started to answer and put together some positive series, that's when the fans were able to respond and kind of turn that page. But I think at that game, there's some tenuous moments, especially in that first quarter towards the end, where Georgia's down and we've seen some of the ugly sides of that, specifically Georgia offense rearing its head of drop balls and not converting on third down and some penetration, and you're going, oh, there's some trepidation here in the fans. And Georgia was able to answer, and the fans were able to respond, and the end result was obviously very positive. But I think we started to see some of those fissures created, and I do think it's twofold. One, the standard and expectation has been raised so high from what Georgia has produced on the field that anytime it's not elite and great, that the fans are going, that's not what we're used to. So that's one aspect of it. And two, this is one of the best games for a home game this season. So the energy was better and obviously higher when you're playing in nationally important games like Georgia was on Saturday, and it's a home game. So you look at next year's calendar and you're going, wow, that's a lot of great home game football. Whereas this season probably doesn't quite reach that standard, and this was the game that everyone had circled as a home game that should be really important, and that gets matched up with a 7:30 kick, and the importance of it for Georgia in this season, and it made for a truly electric environment.
So I said this a moment ago that you can talk a lot about, I thought, a really sharp game plan put together by Mike Bobo. Huge night for the Georgia tight ends, including Oscar Delp, who had 2 touchdowns. Carson Beck was very good. The defense did a really good job of limiting the big plays for Tennessee. He gave up some rushing yards, but I thought it was a good job for the defense overall. And, yeah, all of that said, to me, the night belonged to the Georgia offensive line. And what a great moment for them, that unit, through injury and everything else, to have a great game. You're watching a video, you see the lunch pail being carried by Dylan Fairchild, and that is a real lunch pail right there. Like I said, that's somebody's great uncle, somebody's grandfather. That thing has been on a construction site. That is a gorgeous, gorgeous piece of Americana right there. I love that. But I also love the way this Georgia offensive line played after facing perhaps some justifiable criticism, but either way, responding to that with the kind of performance that I think everybody would have said, of course, is possible, of course exists as an achievable objective, and that's exactly what they did, perhaps signifying they may be the sort of big sort of component piece of the rest of the story for this season that we've kind of always thought was possible. How big was that Georgia offensive line for you on Saturday night?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it was much better than what we saw the week before, and I think the lunch pail message was one that was probably echoed throughout the entire week, knowing that it was a big challenge. I mean, Tennessee's defensive front is on that same level as Ole Miss, and for Carson to have those opportunities, the expectation is that the offensive line had to play better. And I think with Monroe Freeling playing the entire game, and really that interior being challenged, having seen what happened this past week, they had to answer the bell. And Carson, for as much criticism as he's gotten throughout the season, and in my opinion, justifiably so, he had an exceptional game. It was what we expected from him this entire season. The accuracy, the deep balls, his ability to find the various receivers that are open throughout the game. He was able to do that and really started off that way. It was the first play to Arian Smith, and you think, oh, we're rolling. But his ability to challenge down the field was needed. And, we still see a couple of those drop passes, and we still saw, candidly, BA, the offensive line, it was much better than the week before, but there's still opportunity. And I think that's the good news is they can continue to get better. I think having Monroe out there and that consistency was probably a good thing. Ernest Green has struggled this season. I think anybody who's watched them play specifically up front, there have been some challenges. And so anytime there's an opportunity to challenge one another and take your game to the next level, that's a good thing. I did think that they played better, but there's still more meat on the bone there for them.
How much of the sort of improved play from Beck, at least based on kind of what the perception of him has been prior to this, can be attributed to just being given more time to throw? Because, I mean, obviously, other than a couple of rushing plays, I thought this offensive line did a good job of keeping Beck clean all night long. I mean, how much of Beck's performance can be attributed to the fact that he just was in a pretty comfortable and kind of pleasant pocket for most of the night?
Yes, and that's where they stepped up, right? I think the ability to give him some time. There was a lot of protections where we asked a lot of our backs. We would be in a full gap scheme, sliding the line one direction or another, which, kind of, wow, how about that? Headbutt with no helmet. I don't know if I'd advise that to anyone, but whatever gets you fired up, brother. But they did. They played better. And, we asked our running backs, they were put one-on-one with some defensive ends at times. And we had some challenging route combinations. I mean, you saw the number of 20-plus yard completions that Carson had. So a lot of those take time. You saw the variety package of protections. It wasn't just straight drop back. Everyone's got, the 4 down and one linebacker. There was some movement. There was asks of tight ends and running backs throughout it. But ultimately, they were able to provide those opportunities that Carson's needed. And really, I think the ability for him to find those tight ends and for them to challenge Tennessee secondary with a lot of they're playing some man situations. It's one-on-one situations, and Carson put the ball in places for our wide receivers and tight ends to make plays. And I think that's it goes hand in hand with his ability to step into more throws than he probably has been in the past few weeks. So, offensive line does get a lot of credit there, but they're not alone. There was, I'm sure it was a very spirited week offensively of saying we've got to play better. And across the board, I think there were certainly times where they answered that call.
So I'm really trying to avoid doing a whole lot of like college football playoff selection committee talk today. That obviously sort of better served tomorrow because the rankings will come back out again. But I do think that you can't talk about what Georgia did on Saturday without putting this into the, I guess, sort of, the universe of the schedule that Georgia's playing and the fact that some of the reasons why we think of Georgia as an imperfect team is because they are just being asked to do more than, we can talk about the Big Ten teams, but even a team like Texas, who the only ranked team they've played thus far is Georgia, and Georgia obviously beat them pretty handily. They're in Austin. And that Georgia comes off a situation where it's played, 5 ranked opponents. They go 3-2 in those games. Only one of those was at home. Neutral site win against a Clemson team in blowout fashion that may win the ACC. A win at Texas. A hard-fought game against Alabama. A game against Ole Miss that doesn't do where Georgia obviously didn't play very well. But then to come bounce back at home and win convincingly against Tennessee, John, hard not to look at 3-2 in those games and say, in a roundabout way, Georgia kind of did its job. And that you hope that the committee gives credit for that. You hope that people at some point sort of pay attention to who has played whom and kind of how that impacts your record here. I know that Kirby offered a pretty forceful defense of his guys on that. We're going to get more into that tomorrow. But the fact that Georgia is doing what it's doing against a schedule, the likes of which I'm not quite so sure how many teams in the history of the sport I've ever seen play, that has to be an important consideration into all of this, does it not?
It should be, but it's what it's proven is this is a process that's in flux, and it's so subjective that anytime you're talking about a committee of people that are meeting in a room and deciding who is worthy and who is not, I can guarantee they haven't seen all these teams play every snap. It's just impossible to watch that much football, process it through. So there's a lot of subjectivity where they're just looking at numbers and what's on paper, and that's a flawed process. We saw the flawed process last year where Georgia they had a very real case to argue to be one of the 4 teams available in the college football playoffs. Same thing for Florida State. They had an argument to be made. There will be teams this year, even though it's been expanded to 12, there's going to be teams that are on the outside looking in that are saying, how did we get left out? And Georgia should not be one of them. I don't expect them to be. Really, the argument's going to be where they're ranked. And I think it's almost an advantage at this point if you're not playing that extra game in a conference championship. I mean, you look at 4 additional games on top of a 12-game season. That's a full NFL season. And you throw in an extra game against a quality opponent, and Lord knows, based on last year, that it can be harmful to those teams that participate. So, it's a flawed process. I think there will most certainly be teams that are going to be upset. I think there's going to continue to be changes when you look at these guarantees of conference representation and how you get to the 12. It's subjective, and when you're talking about being able to enter into the playoffs, that's the last thing that you want. You want it to be objective. You want teams to be able to understand what it takes to make those playoffs. And right now, with the system in place, that's not the case. It's in the eye of the beholder. And as Coach Smart spoke to directly after the game, no one knows exactly what that is. And that's a problem.
And let me just say this real quick. Putting aside whatever the committee chooses to do this year, last year, whatever else, as a fan of the sport, I sort of prefer this kind of schedule more so than the schedule that Georgia played a year ago, where they go undefeated in the regular season, but you're really not 100% sure how good Georgia really is because they weren't really tested in the same kind of way. It's also just week to week not as entertaining. This is a much tougher schedule. I don't believe anyone could go undefeated playing this schedule, and frankly, I'm not sure anybody could avoid 2 losses with a schedule like this. Georgia may be putting together something close to sort of a top-end performance against this particular schedule. But I would say it's way more entertaining. And, I do think at times maybe, some fans have come down a little bit hard on the imperfections that show up when you play a schedule like this. I wish more teams were playing a schedule similar to Georgia's. I think that'd make the sport more fair overall. But, I think a version of college football where we get a lot more big games and therefore more losses perhaps for your favorite team is more entertaining than, like, say, Georgia could go beat Clemson in the ACC like what they were a few years ago where they're winning national championships, but they never play a regular season game of consequence. I don't think that's as much fun. It's the actual big games themselves, which are the best part of all of this. And so if there are more big games and conversely a few more losses that go along, with that, I think that's actually a better product overall.
Yes, and the caution to the college football playoff panel is don't de-incentivize teams to put together seasons like this, to put together a calendar where there's a lot of really good football being played. I don't want, and fans, I'm sure, are the same way. We don't want to watch 8 meaningless games just in order for them to say, oh, this is a undefeated or one-loss team. If you've only played, subpar, below average, non-competitive games, that's not good football. That's not good for the overall product. And what we saw last week is Georgia got penalized for playing a better calendar worth of football. And that's a huge problem. That's a road that, in my opinion, they don't want to go down. I don't want to see, of the 12 teams that make the playoffs, 4 or 5 of them that have a good win-loss record and score a bunch of points, but it's against teams that are inferior. That's not good for the sport. That's not good for college football. And it de-incentivizes teams from saying, I want to put together a calendar of really good football games where we know exactly where we stand and we've played some good games and we've tested ourselves and we've provided a good product for the fans, but we're getting hurt in the end because they're only looking at wins and losses and amounts of points scored and score differential and all the things that are statistically impressive, but certainly don't matter when it comes to what it looks like when you play quality opponents. I think we can all say we know more about Georgia following a game against Texas or a game against Ole Miss or a game against Tennessee this past week than we ever would with a game against a Mississippi State or UMass coming up. Those games will not tell us more about this team than what we've learned from those big opportunities. And there's a number of teams that still have these shining records and these glowing statistics of point differential that we still don't know about. Are they only good because the separation in talent is so huge that great. They can blow out, these lesser teams. It's like me playing basketball against my, 14-year-old son versus someone who I'm not great, but someone who is good, go up against someone of equal or greater talent, and then you'll know more about it. So I despise the fact that at some points it feels like we are taking away that carrot of providing a better in-season product.
No, I think that's exactly right. Jon, great stuff. Thank you for being here. By the way, your home for Thanksgiving looks beautiful. I love the little give thanks in the background there. You love to see that. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We'll, of course, look forward to having you on next week as we roll a little closer to Thanksgiving by next week. And obviously, a lot of fun to be had with that. So appreciate being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Always enjoy it. Always grateful and thankful to be a dog, and grateful that my wife is able to decorate our home and make it look nice for me to sit in front of. It's great to be a dog. Go Dogs. Appreciate you, BA.
Go Dogs for sure, Jon. We appreciate you too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, we'll do more of the CFP stuff tomorrow. I will say this. We'll play those clips from Kirby from Saturday. The only thing I'll say as kind of a lead into some of that, I was happy to get Kirby kind of on board with he didn't quite rip the committee, but he definitely, expressed some skepticism about what these guys and gals know about all of this. It was kind of nice to have him do that. Kirby, to me, comes across sometimes as a little bit of like an institutionalist. The system's been pretty good to Kirby, and so therefore he sort of supports the system. I'm a little bit more of a dissident thinker than perhaps Kirby Smart is sometimes. So kind of nice to hear Kirby, both with the post-game interview and then the post-game press conference, essentially come out and say, I'm not sure what these guys are looking for, nor if they would know it if they saw it. He didn't say the last part, but I'm sort of paraphrasing that. But the point is, I think that's pretty good. And with the rankings coming out again tomorrow, we'll do some of Kirby Smart's thoughts on the committee when we get there. For now, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And for our golden shoe later on, one of our golden shoes, we're going to have a guy from our DawgNation cruise is going to be a winner, which just reminds me of the special bond. You talk about DawgNation kind of coming together, unified. The big game there on Saturday. One of the great ways that our version of DawgNation comes together during our year is with our DawgNation cruise. Listen, I'm really lucky in the fact that I get to meet a lot of Georgia fans doing the job that I do, and it's always the thing that I probably enjoy about my job the most is just getting to know how many great Georgia fans there are out there and how many of them are kind enough to spend some time with us. But the special knowledge of, the special bond you form with the DawgNation cruise folks is beyond anything like that, because it's 4 days. I should say it's 4 nights. It's a 4-night cruise of just getting a chance to be with folks, and the sort of unique connection you form when you spend that much time with somebody. It's really awesome. It's really incredible. And I wish we could do it more than once during the year, to be honest with you, because it's almost like our sort of DawgNation summer camp in many ways. You just sort of get away and kind of unplug from the world a little bit and kind of connect with people who share common interest. It's a great thing, including our love for the actual ships themselves. And a ship like Utopia of the Seas got so many great things going on. If you're watching on video, you see the beautiful Giovanni's Table there. What a great thing that is. A great restaurant. So give a call to Jessica Slater. She can help you get booked up on all this. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. It's April of 2025. Leaving from Port Canaveral, 4 nights, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, Perfect Day, Coco Cay. All of that is coming up. So, we can't wait for that. Now, here's what's also coming up on our show. Before we're done, we're going to have a really good video look at some of the best, exciting, atmosphere moments from Saturday, why it was such an unforgettable night. And the guy that shot all that for us, Cody Chafin, is going to join us to sort of describe what it's like being on the field, seeing the fireworks, seeing all the fans, mostly all dressed in black, the intensity that Tennessee was forced to deal with, and the special night that was Between the Hedges. Our Cody Chafin will tell us more about that for a couple of minutes here coming up. Prior to that, though, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean today. Let me start with some whining Tennessee folks here for a moment. And I wasn't going to do much on this in the show because teams whining after Georgia beats them is not necessarily a new thing. But I do think there's a couple of things that perhaps need to be said about the complaining that Tennessee is doing based on what they thought were a handful of bad decisions by officials. Now, listen, we know the SEC officials are not perfect. And perhaps if you really did go through play by play, you'd see an example of, maybe a call that went against Tennessee that could otherwise not have. Georgia certainly understands that kind of stuff too. But like the things that you're hearing the most about from Tennessee fans, and frankly, I thought that Josh Heupel did himself no favors in his post-game press conference on Saturday either. Our Kaylee Manziel was in there for that and talked about that with us on the Dog Nation post-game show. There are a few things that are being talked about specifically that are just like factually incorrect. So what's the thing that everybody likes to be these days? I'm going to be a fact checker here for a moment. I'm going to correct the record on a few things. So one of the things that Heupel is complaining about is the review that eventually kind of penalized Tennessee for 12 men on the field defensively, an illegal substitution. And this is just sort of cut and dry. Like there was a 12th man on the field that did not get off before the ball was snapped. They should have called it during live action. It's a bad job of the officials that you had to go to a replay review to get it. And the actual procedure of all of this is obvious. Heupel was trying to be too cute on this, and because a lot of you know the rule. It's like if the offense doesn't sub, then they don't have to stop. But if the offense does sub, one of the is it the lines? I always get the officials confused. Is it the linesman, the line judge, whatever it's called, that steps in front of the football, which also gives the defense a chance to substitute. What Heupel did was, after that period of substitution, then after that, he tried to run another defensive lineman on, and they tried to switch very late, trying to be cute with that, and they deserve to get penalized for that because, and the officials, as they kind of rightly pointed out, they're not stopping play for this second substitution after you already had time to sub, and now you've changed your mind or you're trying to mess with the rhythm of the game, and you're going to try to run another sub on after that. This is not baseball. This is not a between-inning break, okay? This is a couple of seconds to run a couple of guys on, and you try to do that late, and you didn't get away with it, nor should you have been able to get away with that. The other thing that's showing up here is, and we can't show game highlights, so we're not going to show you the actual moments, but the other thing here is what people thought should have been a false start on Carson Beck. So help me, it's amazing to me how many people spend their entire life watching football but don't know the rules of football. The criticism is that somehow Beck was moving backwards when the ball was snapped. Therefore, that's supposed to be either a procedural penalty or a false start. But let's talk about the basic rules of football for a moment. You can move backwards before the ball is snapped as long as you're the only person in motion, the only man in motion, but you can't be moving forward. If you're moving forward when the ball is snapped, that's illegal motion. If you're moving backwards, that's fine. We see this in a couple of instances. Sometimes the quarterback will walk towards the sideline, kind of the fake play where you do the direct snap wildcat to a running back. That's essentially the same thing. Also, are you aware of like what orbit motion is? When sometimes it's a back, oftentimes it's a slot receiver. When they go in motion around the quarterback, they are running backwards when the ball is snapped. There's nothing wrong with moving backwards as the ball is snapped, whether you're running forward in that direction or if you're stepping backwards. Moving backwards away from the ball as it's snapped, there's nothing wrong with that. Also, the center moves, the quarterback moves, but the rest of the offensive formation didn't move at all. But once again, the basic letter of the rules would explain to you that you don't have to move when the ball is snapped. Now, if you let's just say the Georgia offensive line, let's say they hated Carson Beck, and they wanted Carson Beck to get ransacked after a play. They don't have to move. The ball can be snapped. They can remain still. The only thing they can't do is move before the ball is snapped. You have to be set before the ball is snapped. But there's no rule that says you have to move after the ball is snapped. That's essentially what happened here. Center and quarterback moved. Everybody else remained still. That's not a false start. Like that's not a procedural. You didn't have anybody in motion. You had Beck moving backwards. That's not a penalty. And anybody who knows the rules would understand that. There was the complaint on the face mask call against Nitro Tuggle. I've seen video that makes it certainly look like it was a face mask to me. The very grainy, like Zapruder type film that some Tennessee fans are sharing doesn't show the face mask, but that's why they're sharing the video. There's other video that's out there that does show Tuggle having his face mask tugged on, no pun intended. There's the kickoff right before the half, and I'm not even really sure why this matters, where they're complaining that it should have been a kick out of bounds, and Tennessee should have gotten the ball at the 35-yard line. But once again, and I don't want to spend like forever on this, Are you familiar with the phrase when somebody goes in the end zone, he broke the plane? Hey, he broke the plane. That's what they say when somebody goes into the end zone. Like, has it ever occurred to a Tennessee fan? Perhaps it hasn't. Maybe this is a question that answers itself. Has it ever occurred to a Tennessee fan when we call that the plane, but we don't call, like, the 34-yard line a plane? Has anybody ever thought about why that is? That the yardage is a line, but the end zone is a plane? Does anybody know what a plane actually is? That when the ball crosses over that plane, even if it doesn't touch in the goal line, it is still the plane of the goal line in between the pylons. Has anybody ever thought about that? Perhaps Tennessee fans have. So the point is, I've seen a lot of complaining for Tennessee fans about this and Heupel himself, and to me, it doesn't indicate some sort of like egregious officiating error as much as it demonstrates the fact that Tennessee fans don't know the rules, which can only be added to the list of other things apparently they don't know. Many, many books could be written about what Vols fans don't know. In fact, a lot of books have been written about things that Vols fans don't know. That's the latest issue. All right, so let me do a couple of things here real quick before we kind of get back to Georgia and Tennessee from Saturday. Y'all know I hate the lousy, stinking Gators. I hate Florida. I've made a whole like cottage industry out of hating Florida. In fact, I'm even more mad at Florida than I've ever been before because our Eddie is no longer, I shouldn't say he's no longer with us. He's not dead. He's just not with us on the show right now because of what Florida folks were trying to do to him. But I got to give him a little credit here. After Florida beat LSU on Saturday, which is a story in itself, y'all, Florida's social media, I'm not going to show this to you, I don't have time to. Florida's social media people went after Brian Kelly. And, you know, Kelly had a rough night because he got seen on video really chewing out some of his players in a way that some people didn't love. I didn't see it, so I can't really comment on that. I just heard about it. But their social media was going after him. And I guess the primary thing here was, at one point in time, I guess Kelly challenged his LSU players to learn the words. You know the Tom Petty song they do at the fourth quarter for Florida, the I Won't Back Down? Kelly said he wanted his players to learn the words of that because he wanted them all singing that. It's very, very similar to the thing the other day where, like, Dan Lanning told Oregon, you know, the whole "Are you not entertained" thing, and he wanted him saying that to Michigan the other day, and it worked out exactly the way that Lanning had challenged his players to do. Well, this was the exact opposite of that, where, like, I guess Kelly had told LSU, you know, we're going to be beating Florida on the road. We're going to be singing that Tom Petty song once you learn all the words to it. Well, that is not what happened. And Florida came for Kelly on Saturday. It was actually pretty funny. So I don't like the lousy, stinking Gators, and I hate them even more than ever because of what they've done to our Eddie. But they went after Brian Kelly pretty good on Saturday, and that was actually pretty funny. Big win for South Carolina against Missouri. And listen, you know, Missouri obviously keeps it closer than experts would have thought and probably kind of fought a little bit hard on the road here. Brady Cook does come back and play the game. But I tell you, right now, South Carolina is pretty good. And for whatever reason, Shane Beamer just doesn't get the credit that some SEC coaches get. In fact, compare him to the guy we were just talking about. You know, he comes into the league the same time as Josh Heupel does. I think that people have this assumption that Heupel is, like, doing way better at Tennessee than Shane Beamer's doing at South Carolina. I don't know how much actual truth there is to that. That if we treat Heupel as a coach with some staying power at Tennessee, I mean, I think that Shane Beamer should be getting some of that credit for South Carolina. This has been all year long an outstanding defense. But let me tell you what's happening now. Suddenly, the last 2 weeks, their quarterback, who at one point in time we would have said worst quarterback in the SEC, Lenora Sellers, worst quarterback in the SEC. He is not playing that way right now. And when you put Sellers, the way he's currently playing, with this defense, Gamecocks are an incredibly tough out right now. They are a really, really tough team. Now, they've lost 3 times. They kind of got not quite blown out, but handled pretty easily at home by Ole Miss. I don't think there is a world in which they are even a fringe playoff contender. I don't think. But they're having a very good season. And I don't know what it adds up to. I don't know how you build off this in a transfer portal world. I don't know. But they are not getting enough credit for having an outstanding season right now in the SEC. I'll also briefly mention Oregon avoids upset at Wisconsin. Oregon had been kind of, you know, the phrase I'd used before, they'd been pretty death marchy, you know, after the game against Ohio State. They won the one big game they had to win. They had been mostly handling their business in relatively unspectacular but pretty dominant fashion against the Purdues and some of these lesser Big Ten teams they've been playing. Illinois, they had just been sort of easily marching through those games in a very Georgia-like fashion. This is also a little bit of a Georgia-like game for them because Oregon's off this upcoming weekend before taking on Washington to end the season, the regular season. Kind of easy to imagine a little bit of a sleepwalk game from Georgia in the spot. Lanning kind of maybe taking a page out of that book, going on the road to Wisconsin, knowing you've got a week off after this, just trying not to exert too much energy perhaps. But y'all, if this is the number one team in the country, and if this is the only undefeated team in America right now, do you really believe they're unbeatable? Or the team that played them close, Ohio State, do you really believe they are unbeatable? I mean, we will talk about Georgia's imperfections, and it does have some. But if you're going to count Georgia out of being able to win the national championship, you've got to be able to tell me who will win the national championship. And maybe it's one of those two Big Ten teams I just mentioned. But would you really bet your hard-earned money on that right now? Even if you wouldn't bet Georgia. We talked about this last week. Even if you wouldn't bet Georgia, is there some team right now that you would say, you know what, that team is going to win the national championship? It seems pretty wide open to me. And if it's that wide open, then why not Georgia, especially if it can find a way to play the way that it did this past weekend? And that is cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, we've got a lot to do before we're done. I want to get to it here quick, but I also want to give a shout out to our friends at the Finnish Long Drink as we do. For so many people, it was an awesome tailgate on Saturday, and for so many of us, an awesome tailgate means the Finnish Long Drink. In fact, actually on Saturday, I got to go to a tailgate for a minute. My brother's good friend Andrew was there, and he had his Finnish Long Drink rocking and rolling, and my wife was enjoying some long drink cranberry. Now, listen, I'm a professional. I'm at work, so I'm not doing anything like that. But she was enjoying that, got a chance to be at the game on Saturday, and my brother and his friends, they were all enjoying all that too. So I love to see the Finnish Long Drink come out for a great tailgate situation. And so as you're enjoying some, you get two great home games to do that. It's a great thing for your Thanksgiving celebration too. It's just going great with whatever you're doing. So make sure you check it out online, thelongdrink.com. Whichever variety you choose, I think you'll enjoy it. My wife likes the cranberry. I like the traditional citrus, that blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. All kinds of great stuff going on with that Finnish Long Drink. So make sure you check it out today. All right. In a moment, we're going to bring on Cody Chaffins, who did a great job of kind of capturing all of the best moments from Georgia's win against Tennessee on Saturday. But if you're watching on video, I thought it was appropriate here today because Cody did a really good job of kind of getting this turned around quick and up on the site there on Saturday night. It's one of those moments you want to remember, and obviously great video gives us a great chance to do this. Let's just pause here and reflect on a night between the hedges that I don't think any of us are going to be forgetting anytime soon. Let's look back on some of those great moments from Saturday night here. So listen, I don't think you can do a better video than that. I just think it's an awesome way to look back. First of all, I love how theatrical the experience of college football has become because honestly, I do like that kind of stuff. I like bells and whistles. I like big shows. We go to a family, we go to theme parks, we go to all this crazy stuff. And I do like the sort of theatrical element to all of this. I like pro wrestling. Y'all know that. Pyro's been a big part of pro wrestling for a long time. I just am into that sort of thing. And so I love the fact that Georgia put on a good show on Saturday, and the perspective of seeing this from the field is just different than you get other places. Our guy who shot all this for us was Cody Chaffins, and Cody described this to us for a minute because when you're down there on the field, it's sort of the focal point for all of this. The explosions, the loud crowd. I mean, I've been down there before where it almost feels like the ground is shaking underneath your feet because of how intense all that was. So I think you did a good job of making us feel like we were on the field with the video you just shot. But when you're actually there or you're observing the players, Georgia feeding off it, Tennessee being harmed by it, like what's that like to see that the way that you observed it all take place on Saturday night?
It's really special. So I've been covered Georgia games now for 20 years, and that was an atmosphere unlike any other, just because it was like during the national anthem when we really understood that, okay, they're actually going to do the fireworks. Yeah. We'd reported it. We knew it was going to come. But when that first firework went out, the rocket's red glare, you could hear the crowd really get into it. So it started at that moment, and it never really ended after that. So loud on the field. Fans were involved the whole time. I thought the sound system, they did a great job making this game feel important. There weren't those lulls that sometimes you could get, the lulls that Kirby Smart talked about when we saw the Auburn game and stuff he was complaining about. There just weren't those moments in this game, and it was just intense from that moment on. And I think the fireworks and the lights, it all added to it, but the crowd was really bringing it.
Yeah, I mean, we had obviously heard through the grapevine there were going to be some fireworks and stuff, and I think some people kind of thought that might be like your cousin Buster sitting out in the parking lot on like the 4th of July, shooting off a few fireworks after touchdowns. And I actually ran into one of the pyro people before the game, and I sort of asked him. He says, "We are about to blow this place out. We about to blow this place out." Which, I mean, and Cody, you've been traveling to these road games too, and I mean, Georgia's faced the brunt of this at Ole Miss and at Texas and at Alabama. And listen, I like the spectacle at places like that too. I just enjoy the spectacle of college football. But when it's all being done and timed at a moment to make it especially intense for your team, not quite as much fun. To have all of that come together in support of your team at the expense of the other guy, that was a lot more enjoyable for so many of us there on Saturday, I think.
It was. Yeah, because like you said, even like Kentucky does a really good job going into the fourth quarter, and we shot some dramatic video there. But when it is for your team, and Georgia, they kind of did that when they, did the Notre Dame and they brought the lights and the LED lights, they could turn red and do all those things. But this is the next step, and this is what had to happen. Tanner Steins, who's one of the associate athletic directors at Georgia, has been at all these games. Like, he's been watching what's going on at all these stadiums. And so the challenge is to bring that out. We've never seen the fireworks. They do fireworks for graduation, and we know how cool it looks, but we never got it to our Georgia football game. And just the video, it just, all I got to do is stand there, right, and point the camera. It makes pretty pictures. The slow motion, I think, helps, of course, too. But the players were feeling it, and it definitely got the fans involved as well.
So let's say this, and I don't know how you solve this problem, and we'll finish up with this. I don't know how you solve this problem, but whether it be like, I know a lot of the Big Ten people are complaining because they feel like the Penn State whiteout got ruined by Fox this year. They made them play Ohio State at noon. Their whiteout game ended up being against Washington. Lane Kiffin said what he said the other day. I don't quite know how you solve this problem. And now, because of the ABC ESPN contract, there are actually probably room for a few more night games. I don't know what you do about this, but the sport's just different at night, right? I mean, it's like, noon or even 3:30, and I don't mind the 3:30 kicks, typically speaking. But when you play the game at night, it's just different. And Georgia has felt the intensity of the night games other places. It got a chance to provide that for its own fans on Saturday. I don't know how you solve this and make it more fair, more equitable. But, Cody, as you saw firsthand and as you delivered on that video, it is a different sport when you play these games at night. It might as well be just a completely different universe.
It's just even warm-ups. Like, they come out, and with the skies dark, it just feels more intense, and it feels more electric out there. And it definitely felt that way. And I think when you get to, like, November, like, Ole Miss almost felt like a night game because the sun went down so early at that game. But, yeah, the 3:30 is even tough. I do love the sunset, and there was something about the CBS games. But, when it's at night and it starts at night, there's something crazy about it. And shout out to the student section. I mean, you and I were there for the dog walk.
That's
and
right.
The student section was full by the end of the dog walk because the Georgia team was a little bit late arriving, but they were loud and proud too. It was so much fun to see. And, I think the other thing that was different about this game is that they played a lot more music during Tennessee's drives instead of just the Redcoats. And I know some Redcoat purists will probably hate that, but I thought it really did keep an intensity. And because Tennessee moves so quick on offense, that music really helped keep the fans in it and make it loud, because sometimes if a team goes fast, they can almost run a play before you realize that they're about to run a play, and you don't get to that chance to get loud and really intimidate them. But I thought they made a difference. You talk about that fourth quarter drive. It's a 4th down and 5, and They're 4th and 4, and Tennessee's going to go for it because they're down a score. Well, they get a false start, had 4th and 9. They punt. Georgia did makes that death march. They made a difference in that game.
All right, Cody, tonight, not before that, just a completely different show. On the Beat with you and Mike Griffith. I understand I have a special guest, the great former Dog Sony Michel, going to be on the All tonight. So that's going to be a lot of fun here on the DawgNation video channels.
And he was in the house, so he'll get a chance to kind of talk about it. He was before even the red lights, so he'll get a chance definitely to talk about a night game before that and how much the fireworks and all that stuff really intensified things.
We will look forward to seeing you and Mike Griffith on that tonight. Cody, thanks for popping on here and talking about this with us here today.
Sure thing.
All right, good stuff there from Cody Chaffins. And we're so late. I don't have time to do this, but Cody's bringing a really good point, which is that I love the Redcoat Band. And to me, that's what Georgia football has kind of always been for me. There's a lot of politics around like how you create the best atmosphere. And when you blare the music from the sound system, you don't hear as much of the Redcoat. They don't get to do like third down music quite as much, things like that. I don't know how you solve this because I do love the Redcoats, but when you mix the music from the PA system with the fans getting loud while, the opponent has the football, in this case Tennessee, it just makes the environment so much better. And it encourages the fans to be louder in a way they're not going to be if you don't quite have that music going. That's the thing that everybody else has figured out. And like the music in these other stadiums is, it's so loud. It's deafening. You can't even hear yourself think. It's so loud. And that's what kind of goes with the crowd to sort of make this incredible mix. That Georgia did a good job of bringing all that together too on Saturday. And some of that probably does come at the expense of the Redcoat Band, which we love. But for right now, that's kind of just what college football is. I'm not really quite so sure what you do about that. But either way, shout out to UGA. Real quick. I think that Josh Brooks is a very fan-friendly athletic director. He goes on Feinbaum Show Friday, made his defense of Georgia in the playoff rankings. That's what fans want. Josh does a good job giving that. But also he and the folks who work with him, support staff, things like that, kind of the associate ADs, the people kind of in charge of the stadium op type thing, a real fan-forward experience in the stadium on Saturday, making the fans feel like they're a part of the game, but also leveraging fan noise to make it hard on Tennessee. And Kirby kind of called for this, right? Kirby sort of called for this to happen. I thought all of them did a really good job of doing that, so let's make sure we give out a lot of flowers for all of that here today. Now, one more thing before we let you go. Let's give a shout-out to our friends at Daytona Beach. 23 miles of shoreline right there on the Atlantic coast of Florida. I grew up going to Daytona Beach, and I love it. And my invitation to you, especially during these sort of times of year, get towards the winter. It's cold outside, perhaps where you are. At least it will be eventually. Well, as things get a little cooler where you are, some warm, enjoyable weather like it's going to be there at Daytona Beach. Great time for a late fall getaway, early winter getaway. You're going to love it. Take advantage of the surfing, some of the best restaurants you'll ever eat at. I'm telling you right now, I've been eating those Daytona restaurants my entire life. There's also an international airport. You can fly directly to Daytona Beach, so that's super convenient. And great time to enjoy great deals on some gorgeous coastal accommodations. You can find out more online, DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. All right, couple of golden shoes, and what has turned out to be the longest show we've had in quite some time. A couple of golden shoes here. Obviously, in celebration of the great moment on Saturday, it started very early in the morning. Marty McGee, SEC Nation, ESPN Game Day, all on hand. And I mentioned one of our DawgNation cruisers, William Perry, was there. William is very good at getting props on television. He's just always kind of had a little bit of a way with finding his way onto the ESPN cameras. And so he had the one on Saturday of the Tennessee Fears the Folding Chair, obviously going back to a relatively unpleasant story from the past, but he had some fun with that on Saturday. I got on Marty McGee with that. Also, SEC Nation, I believe, Game Day too. So good job by William having some fun at Tennessee's expense. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Also, our buddy Mad Dog here. You see poor old Smokey, tear rolling down his face. The L right next to him and says, it was not a good night for Smokey. Mike, indeed, that is the case. We'll give you a golden shoe for that, too. Great stuff there. Lousy, stinking Gators. It's been a long time since Georgia's lost to Florida, about 1,472 days. That's our Gator Hater updater. I've also been told, just for some fun here, it's also been 2,970 days since Tennessee has beaten Georgia, which is quite a long time indeed. So if you're a Dog fan, it's a great time to enjoy your dominance in these rivals. including our Gator Hater Updater right there. So y'all have a great day. We're back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. Man, it has been a while since we've done a show that long. But there was a lot to get to with all of that from Saturday. So glad to have you with us and on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Curtis Williams also bringing up the fact that there was the guy that hit the $800,000 kick on game day on Saturday. Pretty impressive. Actually very impressive. Because to me, kicking a ball through the uprights is one of those things that kickers on TV make look easy. But if you ever like goof around with your kids or something like that, you try to, like, kicking's hard. At least kicking is very hard for me. Very hard for me. I'm always amazed at how easy some people make that look. D-Mart says this is my chance to go for noon. I cannot go to noon today, but one of these days maybe we will. But I cannot do that today. Garrison Tucker says, who do you think Georgia gets in the first round of the playoff? Well, you got to win 2 more times probably to get there, but we think that certainly Georgia is deserving of being in the playoffs. It can get to 10-2. I think have I told you this before? My budding conspiracy theory is that they're going to make Georgia go back to one of these stadiums they've already been to, that they're going to make them go play at Ole Miss again, or at Alabama again, or at Texas perhaps again if Texas doesn't win the SEC. That if we assume that Georgia, doesn't win the SEC, I think right now it's a better chance than not, and perhaps you don't even want to win the SEC, as many people have pointed out. So if Georgia does make the playoff, my budding conspiracy theory is they're going to go make them play at one of these road venues they've already been to, and it'll be even louder this time because it's a playoff game. The one thing I always say is give Georgia a chance to play an elimination game against a non-SEC team. And those games all typically go the same way. 34-3 against Clemson, 49-3 against Oregon, blowout against Michigan, win against Ohio State. To Ohio State's credit, it did, play close with Georgia, but it was still a win for Georgia. I mean, look at these games that Georgia has played against ranked non-conference opponents. Beginning of the year, Clemson 2021, top 10 Cincinnati in 2020, ranked Baylor in 2019. It's been a long time since Georgia's lost a game to a ranked non-conference opponent, and most of those games have been blowouts. Give Georgia a chance to play a non-SEC team and watch what happens. And this is one of the reasons why we're so anti-committee and anti, playoff politics, things like that, because the biggest problem that college football has is the same one it's always had. That if you make this just sort of like whatever happens, no attempt to put thumbs on scale, just let it play out the way that it possibly could, you're going to have SEC teams advancing, and one of these years is going to be like the College World Series. We're going to look around and like half the teams still playing are from the SEC, or perhaps even more than that. They don't want that. So one of the things I promise you will see, perhaps this year, certainly a lot in future years, is that when you have a lot of SEC teams that make the playoff, the easiest way to make sure that your semifinals aren't too SEC-centric is to make sure you pair those SEC teams against each other in the early round games. So the thing that I'm the most on guard for, if the committee does actually give Georgia a chance to play in the playoff, something they didn't see fit to do last year, is the fact they'll make Georgia go on the road against another SEC team to begin the playoffs. And I'm not saying that Georgia couldn't win that game. I'm just saying that give me a chance to play a BYU or a Indiana or a Penn State. I'll go to Happy Valley tomorrow. Give me a chance to play a non-SEC team, even if it's got to be a road game, a non-SEC team, even on the road. And I think we have a pretty good idea of how those games go. Keith Ritchie says, it seems like the playoff committee doesn't want us to win another national title. What it really is what the committee doesn't want are blowouts. The committee does not want blowouts. And Georgia just has a nasty habit of blowing out. There are about 4 or 5 times a year when you get the best of Georgia. Maybe some years only 3 times. But when it comes together, it's like even last year in the Orange Bowl. Now, Florida State, by its own issues, was pretty depleted, but it was still 63-3. Like the two biggest bowl game margins of victory ever have been Georgia in the last two seasons. That for as beaten up as Florida State was by its opt-outs and tap-outs, that game was still 63-3. Like that's what people hate. And by the people, I mean the power of the beat college football. They hate the fact that a team like Georgia has a nasty habit of winning these games in such uncompetitive fashion. And they hate the fact that you may have the two biggest games of your year and the four remaining teams be from like Athens and Oxford and Tuscaloosa. They don't want that. They don't want that. They don't want what they view as sort of a tiny sliver of the map creating, or controlling so much of college football success. They are going to try to put their thumb on the scale to create balance in the sport. And like a lot of powerful people, they may look like idiots, but they are not dumb when it comes to the only thing that matters to them. The only thing that matters to them is not who wins, it's who watches. And last year, when they manufactured a playoff that had a Southeast team, a Southwest team, a Pacific Northwest team, and a Midwestern team, when they manufactured that playoff, the ratings were through the roof. The ratings were very, very high. They don't care who wins. They simply care who watches. And they will totally ignore whatever is true from a competitive standpoint to create the kind of television product they want. And honestly, sometimes the very best teams are not very good for TV. So if you can do something to get them out of there and create the sort of balance that you want, that is what they choose to do. Cassie Turner says it just looks like a participation trophy. So what you really have, Cassie, is, and I, in some respects, sort of agree, that the sport is almost going backwards, where when I was a kid back in the 80s, there was no national champion. I mean, you had the AP poll and the UPI poll who voted on a number one team, but there was no mechanism for determining a national champion. The bowls didn't even try to do that for the most part. We're kind of going backwards where, honestly, if this season comes to an end and you've got like a win at Texas and a win against Tennessee and like these moments that you collect beginning of the season against Clemson, like that's what the 80s used to be. It's like, yeah, they picked somebody else won the national championship, but boy, I had good memories of, beating whoever you would have beaten back during that time. Like, we may be moving into a direction where there is a playoff and there's a lot of television ratings to be had from the playoff, but as a reasonable mechanism for determining a national champion, we may be going back to the 80s where, like, this is all just decided in the boardroom. This is like backslapping in smoke-filled, rooms. This isn't real competition. We may be going back in that direction. We'll see. DMart42 says it'd be the most Ole Miss thing of all time to lose to Florida. So and by the way, we had been saying this too, that like, people were kind of assuming that chalk was going to hold and you're going to have this glut of teams at 10-2 or 6-2 in the league. And you may still have some of that. But we said, hey, watch out. There will be some upsets. Florida beating LSU was an upset. You kind of wonder now that Florida's gotten that upset win, does that get Ole Miss's attention more? Because I was sort of thinking that Lagway would be healthier next week than he is this week. And even though Ole Miss is a better team than LSU probably, Florida may have a better chance of upsetting Ole Miss than they did of upsetting LSU just because Lagway would be a little healthier. Well, now Florida's pulled the upset against LSU, so perhaps if there was any chance that Ole Miss got caught napping, seeing Florida win that game against LSU, a team, by the way, that beat Ole Miss, maybe that gets Ole Miss's attention. Jeff Ingram says that Bear Alexander was in Athens. I saw some picture of this. I never know what's real and what's not. Do y'all ever have this problem where, and, this is not because of misinformation. It's just people put a lot of stuff on the internet. I never know what's real anymore. And so when I saw the Bear Alexander thing, I didn't know if it was real or not, but I guess maybe it was. I don't have any reason to believe it means anything, but I did notice that. Andrew Hughes says, tell Kirby he let the fans down by not wearing black jerseys. The fans pay the bills. He says Kirby not wearing the black jerseys was hokey pokey. So I do think there's a chance, and I don't know this for sure, but talking to somebody who talked to somebody, knows somebody, kind of on through the sort of, the rumor mill, telephone game. I think there's a chance that Georgia would have done an old school blackout against Tech. Not as a motivational ploy, but just as something kind of fun to do. Games on Black Friday, everybody wears black. Because I think that Georgia sort of embraced the notion of playing that game on a Friday night. Give a little extra juice to the game. Game's been on at noon for a million years. I think that Georgia was a little bit on board with playing that game on a Friday night. The rumor mill for a while had been that Clemson, because they don't like the ACC anymore, said we're not playing South Carolina on Black Friday. That they got asked to play the game on Black Friday, and the rumor mill was, and who knows what's true? I mean, who knows what's true? The rumor was that Clemson turned down the chance to play on Black Friday. I had heard that Georgia wanted to play on Black Friday, was excited to play on Black Friday, even though it's a high school football night here in our state, that Georgia was kind of okay with that. And so in light of that, I think there's a chance that Georgia was just going to blow it out. And they may still do it. But part of the reason why we didn't get fully on board with the whole blackout thing last week, we didn't really, to the extent that, I don't know, that we could have, done whatever. Part of the reason why we didn't kind of get behind this is because I was sort of thinking that the blackout was coming for the Georgia Tech game. And that I don't know that Georgia wanted to, do the whole, this is all just speculation. All of this may be wrong, but somewhat informed speculation. I don't know that Georgia wanted to do the whole, blackout, what do you call it? Pomp and circumstance after a loss. I think it just didn't want to do that necessarily. So I think there's a chance they would have done old school blackout where the signage in the stadium said blackout and they play the Fade to Black by Metallica, Back in Black, AC/DC, whatever black-oriented songs have come out in the last, 20 years that I maybe don't know about. Songs with black in the title. I think there's a chance that they would have done all of that for Tech, and they may still might. The game is on Black Friday, after all. But so I just think that that's one of those deals where, to the fans' credit, they all decided they wanted to wear black, and they did. Honestly, why wouldn't every night game just be a blackout? I mean, to me, that solves the problem. Because it looks, when it's night and everybody's wearing black, that looks really cool. I would say in the daytime, the red pops with the sunshine. I think red looks cool during the day. I think that, honestly, everybody wearing black, which is, after all, a Georgia color, everybody wearing black at night just looks cool. Why wouldn't every night game just be a blackout? It's like one of those things of, I don't know, just to me, every night game being a blackout. And the team can wear black jerseys or not. I mean, honestly, if you want to take the hokey pokiness out of the black jerseys, I've said this a million times, Georgia should start wearing them more, not never wearing them, but by making it this special thing you never wear, to use Smart's phrase, that makes them more hokey pokey. I think one of these years, Georgia should just wear the black jerseys for every home game, whether it's even 100 degrees at the beginning of the season. We're just wearing black jerseys all the time, and now it's just a fashion choice, and sometimes we wear them and sometimes we don't. They should just wear black jerseys more, and that would, I think, take some of the, sort of negative stigma away from them. So, yeah. Let's see what else. Johnny Surf Dog says, just win, baby. Don't care about colors. Yeah, see, I'm not like that, Johnny. And I get the point that you're making, but and I do get the fact that not everybody is into the theatrics. I have no problem telling you, I love uniforms. My son and I talk about uniforms all the time. We'll sit around and just talk about uniforms. I just like uniforms. I like my own team's uniforms. I like other teams' uniforms. Which ones I'm talking about talking about them. Which ones I like. Which ones I don't. I like talking about fireworks. I like pyro. I mean, I told you before, I'm a little bit of a carnival barker by nature. I like sort of carny sideshow stuff. I do. I like theme parks. I like wrestling. I like state fairs. I just like all that kind of stuff. I like theatrics in sports. I do. Savannah Bryan says no black jerseys ever again, except for the spring game. Yeah, I can't. And listen, Brian's a great commenter, but I can't get on board with that. I can't get on board with that. JP says Tech is good enough that if we make mistakes or don't execute, we could lose. They are similar to Mississippi State on offense in some ways, but more physical. Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think Tech's a bad football team. This is as much juice as a Georgia and Georgia Tech game has had in a while, right? When was the last time the Tech-Georgia game had this much juice? I think it's going to be treated as a fairly big game. I really do. A lot of times Thanksgiving week, we're a little bit sleepy, I mean, sometimes our show is. We're just kind of, trying to play out the string, get ready for the SEC championship. But this year, there's a very good chance Georgia's not playing in the SEC championship. I mean, honestly, I don't know who's playing the SEC championship. It sounds like if Texas wins out, they've got the easiest path because they have played the easiest schedule. It sounds like based on like some of the tiebreaker stuff, Alabama, now that LSU is lost, Alabama might benefit from some of this tiebreaker stuff. So we may end up having Texas, Alabama in the SEC championship, perhaps. But to go back to Tech, so if Georgia's not in the SEC championship, this may be Georgia's game to I mean, you hate to say it this way because who knows what the committee will ever do, but this may be Georgia's game to clinch a playoff berth. You know how much Tech would love to spoil that for Georgia? Tech played Georgia pretty tough last year. I think the Georgia Tech game, Tech beat Miami this season. Brent Key's record against top 10 teams is way better than his record against unranked teams. I mean, these are the games that Tech typically shows up for, and you got to imagine even more so here. Buster Faulkner probably playing to become a head coach in the very near future, or at least perhaps cash in big for some other job. You got to think he's motivated on all this. DT says the reason Kirby doesn't want black jerseys is the hideous uniforms he was forced to wear as a player during the Donnan era. Yeah, maybe that's the case. And of course, we love Coach Donnan, but not a lot of some of those fashion choices were perhaps regrettable. Yeah, so I think it's probably true. UGA Marine says Bama, Texas, SEC championship. The only way it gets worse if it was Gators, Auburn. Yeah, I guess that's the case. By the way, I was thinking about this. Just very, very quick aside. So one of these years, I mean, it may be a while before Florida's good enough again, but now that we have this mechanism, the SEC championship, it's possible one of these years Georgia and Florida end up playing twice. Do you ever think about this? I mean, Georgia and Auburn played twice a couple of years ago, or a few years ago. I mean, one of these years, if Florida's ever good again, Georgia and Florida may play twice. I was thinking about that because, 2 years from now, the game's going to be at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. What if they played twice in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in the same year? That'd be kind of crazy, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't like Bama or Texas, but do I like Bama playing Texas in the SEC championship? I kind of might. Feels like a pretty good game. Somebody said this in our YouTube comment section earlier. This is crazy. Like this is, but I think it's true. My heart is rooting for Bama in that game. That's wild, right? I mean, because I can't stand Bama, and no right-thinking person can. But I believe I'd probably, the heart sort of wants what it wants. I don't care, how it benefits Georgia one way or another. I'm not sure it would. But I believe my instinct would be to root for Bama against Texas because, my suspicion is up on Texas right now. I'm just telling you right now. I got a lot I could say about all of that. Yeah, and by the way, Eugene Marine says he'd be rooting for Bama too in that spot. And now I'm not going to paint my face crimson and cream or whatever their colors are, but I'd probably be rooting for them. JP says we've struggled with eye discipline this season, and Faulkner knows our defense inside and out. Tech's entire offense is basically kind of built on that. Yeah, they do that thing where it's like the fake toss sweep, and they kind of run quarterback up the middle. They're always really good at that. Faulkner's a good offensive coordinator. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So Tech fans, enjoy him while you got him because you're about to lose him. Marion Jones says Josh Heupel looks more like the Great Pumpkin. Let me tell you something, Marion. I love the Great Pumpkin. I said this before. I'm a big – I don't talk about a lot of this kind of stuff, but big Charlie Brown Peanuts fan. love the Great Pumpkin. I don't like thinking of Josh Heupel and the Great Pumpkin in the same sentence together because I don't have any affection for Josh Heupel, especially after his whining this weekend. So I will tolerate no Great Pumpkin slander. To be compared to Josh Heupel is that's an insult I will not abide when it comes to the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. But yes, does Heupel look like a big orange round thing closely resembling a pumpkin? No, I don't. I don't deny that. I think you're 100% right about that. Winfred Steinspring says, does Bama make it into the playoff if they lose to Texas in the championship? So here's where it gets really interesting. And gosh, Winfred, I wish I had more time to talk about this. So I think one of the things that we have learned as the season has gone along, we've said all along that when you experience something new for the first time, you may make assumptions before the season begins. You'll learn more about it as it plays out. Here's what I believe I've learned. We have long assumed that the SEC championship game would be between the best and the second best teams in the SEC. It just makes sense that'd be the case. But that's not actually necessarily true because in a situation like Texas, their schedule is so wildly different. I mean, wildly different than any other team competing for the SEC championship. So is Texas one of the two best teams in the SEC? I honestly don't know. They might be. And I'm not even like anti-Texas on the field. But the schedule they've been allowed to play, I mean, this is a scandal. It is a scandal. So would I say with great confidence right now that Texas is one of the two best teams in the SEC? I couldn't necessarily say that. And in the case of Alabama, I think Alabama's pretty good. I told you the other day that if you gave me a free ticket on a team to win the national championship, I might take a Bama ticket. I might hold on to one of those for right now. But the tiebreaker scenario is so convoluted that, once again, can you rightly assume that whoever emerges from that tiebreaker is necessarily the best of those teams, given the fact that we're not using some of the typical mechanisms we had used to break ties, such as where you're ranked, which brings some sort of human element into the evaluation? So whoever wins the tiebreaker is so convoluted that I'm not quite so sure the tiebreaker scenarios are all of that useful in determining who the true best team really is. So what that leads me to go back to Winfred's question, whoever loses the game, we would have at one point in time said, well, you can't punish the loser of the SEC championship game. You can't allow them not to make the playoff after losing because those are the two best teams in the league. And they would have had to go play a game other teams didn't have to play. Well, that last part's true, that it's a little bit awkward to have this SEC championship right now, and I say that as someone who loves that game. It's always been my favorite sporting event. But this notion, you can't exclude the loser of the SEC championship from the playoff. Why couldn't you? I mean, when the way in which we're determining who plays this game is so random, why should that randomness be rewarded? You say, well, why would the loser be punished? I mean, I think you can turn that question on its inverse and, ask it a different way. So the SEC championship's role in determining who from the SEC makes the playoff is pretty complicated. And as Miriam points out, they left out the loser of the SEC championship game last year, which is a very good point. Matt Rukavina pointing out one of his favorite jokes from going back years ago, speaking of Peanuts and Charlie Brown Christmas, which may be the greatest animated work of all time, without the Peanuts talk, let's not forget Tennessee can be back singing home again for the holidays. I'll be home for Christmas. Yeah, indeed. Tennessee may find itself on the outside of the college football playoff discussion. And if Tennessee is watching that game at home and watching the playoffs at home, I hope they'll remember it's Georgia that put them there. I hope they'll remember that. Ken Holcomb said Saturday's game looked like a Las Vegas show and a football game broke out. I love it. Yeah, see, that's another thing, Ken. I'm right there with you. I love the big casinos. It's like now a lot of like sports gaming is just done on your phone, which I'm not necessarily against. But there's something about getting dressed up and going to the casino. I sort of think that's kind of nice. Or you go there and you got the glitzy, glittering lights. I like all that. I do like all that. Michael Castleberry, yeah, I heard this. That Kirk Herbstreit's the one that was talking about the procedural thing on Carson Beck. I didn't hear Herbstreit say it, but a bunch of people online were talking about it. And, Michael, that's flat wrong. I mean, this is just Herb Street spread too thin, or I don't know what. That's just flat wrong. Michael writes that Herb Street causes more problems than necessary. Did the same thing for the Texas game. I'm not having the volume up next time he covers the UGA game. Yeah, I did hear this, that Herb Street was hammering this issue about the procedural penalty, and that's just not the rules. That's not the rules of football. It's just not. And you'd like to think the main analyst for the main game and the entire dadgum sport, who makes countless millions of dollars, you'd like to think he'd know that. But apparently that is asking too much. Miriam Corbin says, though, that Herb Street's our enemy. I mean, listen, there was a time when I would consider Herb Street a friendly, right? I mean, he definitely supported Georgia a lot in 2018. And, I mean, I would say that for most of his life as a broadcaster, including in our time doing the show, I've been a pretty big fan of Herb Street's. I have. And I don't think Herb Street's anti-Georgia necessarily. I do think the stuff with Dylan Raiola was just flat out goofy. He ought to know better than that. And I just think the issue with the Beck thing and all the problem that caused amongst these, Tennessee oddballs, is just it's erroneous. It's just flat out incorrect. Berna Blackburn says the booth official then came on and corrected Kirk Herbstreit on it, which I guess for a rare instance, one of these booth officials actually earned their paycheck. I'm glad to hear about that, Berna. Kyle Abui says, how about the national anthem and a great atmosphere? Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome, man. And as I said before, I loved the I loved the Redcoats. I'm a huge fan of the Redcoats. It was kind of nice to hear somebody sing the national anthem on Saturday. Normally the Redcoats play it, and I get a lot out of that. And this weekend they'll do their patriotic salute that they always do for their halftime show, and that's always a really, really touching arrangement. Really, really touching. So I'm looking forward to that. I always enjoy that. But it was kind of nice to hear somebody sing it on Saturday. I felt like people were singing along with it. I was also in the stands. I made a point to kind of be in the stands for a little bit. I wanted to be there. My family was there. They were sitting with my brother. And so it kind of worked out for us to all just sort of be there together for a little bit, which was great, which was awesome. And I just wanted to soak some of that up. Eventually kind of go back to work and kind of, get ready to know what you're going to talk about for the post-game show. But I wanted to kind of just be in the moment for a little bit. It was awesome. And being in the stadium for the national anthem felt especially patriotic. It was really, really good. That was a great, great scene. In a weird way, maybe I'm wrong about this. I almost wish they wouldn't turn the lights off for that, though, because I do think it's kind of cool when you turn the lights off for the first time right before Georgia runs out. And a lot of stadiums turn the lights off for the national anthem. That was the first time the lights went off on Saturday. The one sort of like, once again, I'm into theatrics. I do like that. Maybe I'm a theater geek at heart, maybe. I don't know. The one sort of like theatrical note I might give is, do you wait and turn the lights off for the very first time right before Georgia runs out? And like not go lights out for the national anthem, because not everybody's in their seats by that point in time anyway, although most everybody is, especially for a game like this. Ken Holcomb asks a good question, and we're about to go because it is late. He says, what would a fair ranking for Georgia be? Here's my answer. You can rank them anywhere you want. And putting aside any of my other grievances for right now, here's the one thing. Georgia should be ranked ahead of Texas. Rank them 15th, rank them 1st, rank them 9th, rank them wherever. Georgia should be ranked ahead of Texas. Because Georgia has one additional loss, but they've also played 4 additional ranked opponents. And they also beat Texas head-to-head. So I don't care where you rank Georgia. Georgia should be ranked ahead of Texas. And the Indianas and the, I guess BYU lost, but, all these other teams, put them where you want, at least for now, because it's all made up anyway. Georgia should be ranked ahead of Texas. And that's the one thing. Berna Blackburn also says that Kirk Herbstreit didn't know about the late substitution rule. Yeah, and that's one of those things, like that's gamesmanship from Heupel that he got caught on. And listen, everybody's trying to play the games with the substitution stuff. Georgia tries to go fast to keep being able to substitute. Gosh knows Tennessee tries to do that. Tennessee faked an injury. I mean, everybody knows that the running guys in and out, all of that's gamesmanship. Heupel tried to play a game with that, and he got caught. I mean, Suck it up, Buttercup. That's just how it goes. You tried to run another guy on late, and they didn't let you do it. And they were right not to let you do it. All right, we could talk all day long. We got to go. All right, check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. And you got a lot of people coming over. You want your plumbing to work the right way. All those guests coming over for Thanksgiving, you want to be able to take hot showers. Get that water heater replaced if you need to. Or if it's an emergency situation, you know, don't let your weekend get ruined. Get it replaced, in many cases, the same day. Just find them online, rsandrews.com for more on that. That's rsandrews.com for more on that. You'll have a great day. Don't forget, Sonny Michelle tonight on the Beat. Cody and Mike will have you for that. And I'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.